Thank you, Lloyd, and thank you to the staff at the Swift Current Museum, and thank you all for coming. I'm excited to talk to you today about the first 100 years of history of the Swift Current Library. A lot has happened over the last 100 years, and I thought I would tell you about some of the highlights because there's too much to tell you everything. But the highlights include 3 fires, 2 funding crises, a scandalous banned book, and a literacy donkey, who may or may not have influenced the provincial budget. March 12, 1918 marked 100 years since the formation of the Swift Current Library Board. City Council appointed a committee, and it consisted of Horace Speller, W.S. Cram, R.S. Campbell, J.A. Rolofson, and D.A. Milne. This is the Swift Current Sun from March 1918. I'll talk to you a bit about the first people who were important in the formation of the library. This is Horace Speller. He was a pastor of the First Baptist Church, and he was a farmer, and he's regarded as the founder of the library. He was the chair of the library board from 1918 to 1922. During these formative years, the library struggled to be legally established so that they could access funding. And it was a major struggle in the first few years, and would be throughout the history of the library, really. The library was established and maintained through donations from service clubs, private donations, and support from the city of Swift Current. And the board worked very hard at that time to increase public support. And he was not just a stuffy library guy. Oh, maybe he was. Because he sent this letter into the Swift Current Sun, calling himself a grouch and complaining about young boys who were ripping up magazines and whatnot in the library. And he said that he may have to hire a real old-time grandmother with an old-fashioned slipper to teach some of our youngsters, for they seem to be up to no good. And they're tearing the papers, magazines, and journals. So I think he was writing this letter to the newspaper in good fun. But it just goes to show you that some things never change. We still have complaints about young folks behaving inappropriately, but that's the joy of working in a library. The Treliving family was a really important family in the history of Swift Current's library. John S. Treliving was a former journalist, and he and his family came to Swift Current in 1907. John was born in England in 1870. And he was the librarian at the Swift Current Library, so the very first librarian starting in 1918, and he served until 1930. When he was first hired by the library board, he requested $50 a month for his salary, but the board felt that they could only afford to pay him $25 a month. So he was supporting his family on $25 a month. He got a raise in 1930 to $35 a month. So then he was really in the money. Not really. The kids are named John Arthur and Madge Constance. And his wife on the left is Fanny Rebecca. And we'll come back to her shortly. The Swift Current Library has gone through 3 fires over the last 100 years, but the first was the most tragic. Just 2.5 years after the library opened, so the board had struggled to get the library started, to build their collection, and to find funding and hire a librarian. And then one night, the basement of City Hall, where the library was located, caught fire. And it was especially tragic because the basement of City Hall also housed the town jail. And a man named John Andrewczyk had been arrested the night before. He had gotten drunk and had assaulted someone. And the police came and tossed him in jail for the night. And then I guess there was a caretaker on site, but the fire started and she didn't realize there was anyone down there. And he ended up dying of suffocation, which was really tragic. And there is actually like a really gruesome report in the Sun of that time that you can read, but I won't tell you the horrible details about the coroner's inquest into his death. So City Hall was pretty well, very heavily damaged. The library was destroyed. They tried to salvage some of the books, which had become waterlogged. Fortunately for the library, it was insured for $1,000. So they were able to collect insurance money and rebuild the collection. And the city and the community members also took care of the victim's family. They got his family a place to live and started collecting money to help support his children. So that was fortunate. So it wasn't long after the library was established that it had its first funding crisis. And I think the funding crisis of 1922 really foreshadows the funding crisis of last year. From the beginning, the library had financial support from the city of Swift Current, which was $500 a year, some money from a provincial grant at $200 a year, and lots of donations from private citizens and service clubs. The Kiwanis, Rotary, Orpheus, Fortnightly clubs, the local Council of Women, and the Independent Order of the Daughters of the Empire were instrumental in providing the financial support that got the library off the ground. But library funding is a challenge. And the first funding crisis came in 1922, just 4 years after the library opened. The library board had expected to get $500 from the city of Swift Current, but city council was only able to spend $100. So that was a shock, and the board decided that they were going to have to prepare a layoff notice for the librarian, John Treliving, who only made $25 a month. The community didn't want to see that happen, and so people organized a benefit concert in partnership with the Orpheus Club, and they raised a total of $53.78. And I guess there was enough public outcry that by the following month, City Council had had a change of heart and had found the additional $350 for the library. So after a tense month, the library once again had its full funding. Mr. Treliving's job was saved, and the library carried on. How many of you have heard about Swift Current's banned book? Some of you? The history of the Swift Current Library mentions that in 1923, a book called The Sheik was removed from the library. And I started doing some digging in preparation for our 100th anniversary, and I came across a really fascinating story. The Sheik was basically the 50 Shades of Grey of the 1920s. It was very racy for its time, and one reviewer called it poisonously salacious. But it was a runaway bestseller, so it had about 50 printings within the first year. People loved this book. They couldn't get enough of it. They made a blockbuster movie out of the novel that launched the career of Rudolph Valentino. And it's the precursor of the modern romance genre. And the book was so influential that Harlequin romance novels still follow its outline. So, as part of our 100th anniversary celebrations, our library board decided to investigate why it might have been removed from the library. And we started discussing how difficult it would have been to maintain the funding. The library had just gone through a funding crisis. This book was considered poisonously salacious by many people, and it was just quietly removed from the library. There wasn't a big deal about it. It didn't make the newspapers. So the minutes say that In 1923, a motion passed that the Sheik be removed from the library. It wasn't the only incident of censorship in our library's history. In 1940, a motion was passed that the Saturday Evening Post be removed from the library on account of its anti-British sentiments. This is the accession records of the library. So these are the records that date back to the beginning of the library, back to 1918 in John Treliving's handwriting. And it records all the books that were acquired by the library. And when they were removed, he would write in pencil, "worn out." Yeah, it's really just a historical record at this point. We actually found it in the museum when we were doing research on the history of the library, and they gave it back to us. So it's really nice to have. It's been really interesting to see what the library was like in 1918, and like this is the handwriting of the first librarian and all the books that he cataloged, so it's pretty special. So it starts on May 1918, and the first book they added to the collection was Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery. And the accession book was before computers. It was the way that libraries tracked what they had in their collection. So every time they got a new book, they would record the details. In some cases, we even have, if someone donated a book, they would often make note of who donated it. And once it was removed, they would make a notation here. So Anne of Avonlea was popular, and it was eventually worn out and removed. So you can see over here the Sheik, E.M. Hall, and it's a little blurry, but July 1923, he wrote, "removed." So a bit of swift current controversy right here. Our library board decided to re-examine whether this novel should still be banned from the library. And we had a really good discussion. All our library board members read this poisonously salacious book. Personally, I was a bit scandalized, but I also enjoyed it. And our library board consulted with the public, and we decided to reinstate this book into the Swift Current Library. So as you can see, we purchased a first edition, and it now has a barcode, and you can check it out and read what your grandparents or great-grandparents couldn't. And we have a modern reprint version of the book. You can actually borrow it for free on Project Gutenberg. So that was one of the things we discussed when we were deciding whether to reinstate it into the library collection, that you could actually read it from the public computers in the library, but not borrow a paper copy. So please, it's a good read. It's entertaining. Please borrow it.
The Chinook Regional Library is collecting your photos for a growing internet archive. Images of Saskatchewan is a culture and heritage image bank. The website already has several entries from the general public, some contemporary, others historic. Minnie Shiketer-Paul is the head librarian in Swift Current. She invites the Southwest to share their photos and says her staff will gladly scan your snapshots into the collection.
They're most welcome to come and talk to us. They're welcome to come along and bring their family album or some pictures. We cannot promise that everything will be uploaded, or any pictures about landscape, buildings, people, events, anything that depicts the prairie landscape.
The Swift Current Museum is also getting involved in the project, but director of the museum, Hugh Henry, explains digitizing the museum's photo collection may take several years.
It's going to be a long process because we have several thousand images, some of them in slide format, some negative format, some print format. So our initial images that we're providing for this project are slide images, And those are ones that we haven't been able to utilize much in the past because of the format. So this is a way of, again, bringing that into a medium that we can utilize, and that's also going to be beneficial for others.
Besides simply viewing the pictures online, users also have the option to send their image as a digital postcard. So the next time you go through your photo album, Catcher Paul asks that you get involved and add to this ongoing database.
It's a community autobiography, which is an ongoing project because, Swift Current is going to grow, this region is going to grow. It's an ongoing process. Information always keeps on changing. We ourselves would be a story one day, and I'm sure our great-grandchildren can look it up on the library website.
View the image collection by following the link on the library's website, www.swiftcurrent.ca/library. For Southwest TV News, I'm Joey Donnelly.
I don't think I talked about the location of our first library. It was in the old Central School. This was a school that was later, when the school moved, they built a new Central School. They changed this over into City Hall and housed the library in the basement along with the prison. I like to think of that as Swift Current's first integrated facility. The next building is this one. So you can see the United Church back here, and this is the fire tower of the fire hall. And this is the old schoolhouse that became the City Hall as a schoolhouse, and you can see there's another schoolhouse behind it, and that was eventually turned into Swift Current's first freestanding public library. It's on 2nd Avenue, and it is located where the college sits now. So now we'll get back to Mrs. Treliving. Her husband became ill, and she eventually took over the management of the library in 1930 and served as the librarian from 1930 to 1949. So 19 years in addition to her. I'm sure she was working there quite a bit while her husband was there, because she just stepped right in once he was no longer able. She was born in 1871 in England and came to Swift Current in 1907. And when she retired when she was 78, and then moved to BC to live with her daughter. So she really devoted her life to the Swift Current Library. And it's hard to see, but there's a picture of her as approaching retirement in the library. And she loved kids, she loved her job. The library quickly outgrew the space in this little schoolhouse. Fortunately, a very generous businessman named Charles Thorson bequeathed $18,000 to help fund an expansion onto the technical college, which later became Beatty Collegiate Institute. This is Theodore Mickey. He was the librarian from 1949 to 1967. And he was actually an avid historian, and he has an unpublished manuscript of the early history of Swift Current here in the museum. So I think it would be a really cool project if someday someone could work with it and get that published. His assistant was Joan Nickel, and eventually when he became ill, he stepped down out of poor health, and Joan Nickel took over. So Ted Mickey passed away shortly after he resigned, so that was sad. And he spent a good chunk of his adult life here. And then Joan Nickel Olison was the librarian from 1950 to 1974. So, the R.C. Dahl Center was envisioned as the cultural mecca of the Southwest. And I'm sure you can, yeah, Kim Hotelling from the Art Gallery is saying that it still is. I agree. The building was designed by distinguished Saskatchewan architect Clifford Weens. And it was built to be expandable. It has really beautiful architecture and lots of light comes streaming in. It's about twice as big as it was when it was originally built. They added a large addition to the building in the early 90s. So, for the first 50 years of the Swift Current Library's history, there were 3 librarians. The Mr. and Mrs. Treliving and Theodore Mickey. And for the second 50 years, there were this many librarians. We have one of them here as our special guest today, Myra LaShawn.
Well, you know, this was before automation, so we were battling with, well, we wouldn't say it was a fond memory, but we were battling with trying to convince City Council that we really had to keep up with the times and have some computers in the library. So, and in the end we managed. So that was a big hurdle, and of course, you know, now what would we do without computers? So at the time it took a lot of convincing and demonstrations, and it was hard, but in the end they came through.
People across Saskatchewan started thinking about the concept of regional libraries in the mid-1960s as a way of being more efficient with core services and improving people's access to library resources. So especially for small towns and people in rural Saskatchewan, you know how hard it is to come by things, and sharing library resources made a lot of sense. Chinook Regional Library was formed in 1971, and the Swift Current Library became the regional resource center and became the hub of the local regional library system. So the regional library system enabled patrons to borrow material easily from dozens of libraries in Southwest Saskatchewan. So immediately there was an improvement to the library services people were getting and improved access to library collections. Saskatchewan's libraries took another huge step forward in 2009. Saskatchewan's 10 library systems formed a province-wide consortium called Saskatchewan Information and Library Services. Under the new SILS system, any Saskatchewan resident has seamless access to almost the entire collection of Saskatchewan's 300 libraries. So it's actually over 1.5 million items that you have access to. This shared system allows libraries to work cooperatively to deliver and provide library services and resources in the most efficient and effective manner possible. A feature of Saskatchewan's library system is a universal library card, meaning you can get your library card at any library and go to any other library, any other public library in Saskatchewan and use it. Saskatchewan's library system is really highly regarded around the world as a really great example of cooperation and access. And it's especially important because Saskatchewan is a small province. We are the size of a lot of major cities. Like with 1 million people, across such a vast area, you really would notice if we didn't have access to such a robust library collection. Another fire. And we have a special guest here who features highly in the fire on the right. So I said I would talk about some controversies. And I came across this little book burning controversy from the 1980s. So the library discards a lot of books when they're worn out or out of date. And it turns out that Chinook Regional Library was having a dumpster fire after their library book sale. And people complained about it. And apparently it was a problem to not burn them because of it would set a precedent in other library regions. But eventually they stopped burning the books, and our new library board has a really wonderful system to redistribute discarded books that are called the book nooks. And we have book nooks at about 5 or 6 locations around the city, so that's how we now redistribute discarded books. And they're back into the hands of the people. So this was another library fire, not as tragic as the first one. And art gallery director Kim Hoteling saved the day in this one. The fire started in the furnace room of the art gallery and they noticed smoke billowing out, and Kim came and shut the furnaces off, I believe is the story.
I dashed into the furnace room to see what was going on, and I was looking at the furnaces, and all of a sudden one of the furnaces just opened up and was full of flames, and so we hit the switches and the breakers to try and stop the furnaces as best we can, and then had to dash back out into the library and basically get everybody out of the building. And so by the time we'd come out to pull the fire station, like pull the fire alarm and so forth, the smoke was just rolling, and it was really thick smoke. And we called to everybody in the building, and everybody was evacuated just fine. The firefighters arrived in pretty good time, and they went in the back door of the RC Doll Center into the art gallery, and because it was easy access. And when they walked into just a solid wall of soot, and they were fully suited up for this thick smoke, and unfortunately walked right into one of the artworks in the main gallery, knocked this big ceramic bowl off the plinth, and just broke it, unfortunately. And they were so shocked that the firefighters were alarmed that they'd done this, and so most of the crew was sort of cutting holes in ceilings and then dashing around, and one firefighter in full garb with mask and everything carefully carried every ceramic sculpture from one side of the gallery to the other through the complete solid wall of soot. That was Greg Campbell, and it was so he's a hero in this as well. But the RC Doll Center the fire didn't go any farther, but it had caused so much smoke and soot that the facility had to close for about a week and be cleaned up. And we kind of lived with the smoke cleanup smell for quite a while after that.
And then there was another small fire, and Kim again saved the day. This one was just like a garbage can fire in the men's washroom set by one of our patrons. But luckily, Kim discovered it and put it out pronto. So I promised a bit of controversy. And back in the day, computers were a bit controversial. But there was a point in time where they stopped making index cards for the libraries, and we were faced with a bit of a dilemma because we weren't able to borrow them anymore, and we weren't computerized at that point. So that put the pressure on to get the computerized catalog up and running. I'm sure you've all heard of the integrated facility and the controversy that's caused. So for those of you who don't know, the city of Swift Current has a wonderful plan to build an integrated facility attached to the hospital, which is north of the highway, that would have the library and art gallery and some exercise space and the schools and the seniors care facilities. And yeah, there's a great plan for a big new space, and people find it controversial because of the location, just that it's less accessible than our downtown location. So we hear on a daily basis questions about whether the library is moving, and the answer is that it's not imminent. The city still has it in the plans, but it's not happening anytime soon.
Discussion has been underway for the past number of years for an integrated campus near the Cypress Regional Hospital in Swift Current. A long-term project bringing together healthcare, education, culture, and recreation in the city's north end. And with École Centennial and All Saints Catholic schools already open, and the new long-term care facility near the hospital targeted to open in 2016, many are wondering the status of the city's project. A $150 million concept, which includes an aquatic center, field house with a walking track, art gallery, and library. According to city officials, the work continues to try to access provincial and federal dollars for the project, as the city was recently denied approval in the 2015 round of Canada Building Fund applications.
Well, we continue to try and find some other options that allow us to move forward in some manner or phasing it in. But we still believe that there should be some provincial and federal funds to help assist in building this facility, and so we'll still continue to pursue that eligibility. In the initial round of Building Canada funds that we asked for, we were turned down, but that doesn't mean in future allocations of money that it would still be ineligible.
Once completed, the Swift Current Integrated Facility will encompass 78 acres in the city's north end.
And then funding, of course, is a constant challenge for public libraries. So you're probably all familiar with the events of last year. In the provincial budget, the regional library funding was cut by about 58% with no warning. And so that threw Chinook Regional Library into a real crisis. Chinook Regional Library currently has about 31 libraries across southwest Saskatchewan. And with these budget cuts, we were looking at closing all branches except for maybe about 9. So it would have had a really drastic impact on the people of rural Saskatchewan. And it also threw our Saskatchewan's library system into doubt about whether it could sustain itself through this funding crisis. There were rallies across Saskatchewan. I think about 6,000 people across Saskatchewan rallied on the same day, on April 9th, 2017. And here in Swift Current, we were fortunate enough to have our Premier's office down the road from the library. And I know a lot of people were talking to him privately and really advocating for the library. And people showed up en masse on the day of our rally and with signs. This one here says, Swift Current, where libraries make sense. And across the province, people read books outside their MLA's offices to send a message to the provincial government that they care about their libraries and want them to be adequately funded. So we had about 230 people gather outside Brad Wall's office. And we had regular library volunteers, Shimmer the literacy donkey, who comes to our summer reading club every summer, and Tala the reading dog came for people to read to them. And I've heard rumors that Shimmer may have influenced Brad Wall's decision, but that's just a rumor. Who could say no to a sweet little miniature donkey?
The recent announcement of the provincial budget was full of disappointing news for various sectors, including funding cuts to libraries across Saskatchewan. a loss of crucial funding, which does not sit well with local residents and patrons of the library system. In Swift Current, concerned residents took to the streets armed with signs, drums, and even a donkey, marching up Central Avenue to the office of Swift Current's MLA and the Premier of Saskatchewan. One by one, participants voiced their concerns over the cuts to Saskatchewan's libraries.
The Chinook Regional Library Board is working very hard right now and kind of in a very difficult position to try and figure out how we will maintain library services with a 58% cut to provincial funding that's retroactive to January 1st. We had no warning of these cuts, and we're asking the government to restore funding to Saskatchewan's public library systems in order to save the really excellent library system we have in Saskatchewan that's admired across the country.
And with 32 branches within the Chinook Regional Library System here in the Southwest, its services are crucial to local residents of all ages and walks of life.
It hits everybody. Friend and I drove 120 kilometers this morning one way to be part of this group because I think it is so important. Saskatchewan libraries have provided a link to all the knowledge in the world in a concrete form for the people of Saskatchewan for over 100 years. And the idea that that is going to be taken away from us with no warning and with no real reason is frightening.
Overall changes to the library system across the province, which the youth are voicing their concerns for as well.
There's a lot of youth in there who they depend on the computers, the printers, and all the books and stuff like that, and I think if libraries were to start closing down, it would have a huge negative impact on youth in terms of education.
And with over 250 protesters in Swift Current alone on the same day as similar rallies were held across the province, organizers continue to encourage local residents to show their support for their community library through petitions and other forms of communication to their local MLA.
And I think these 58% cuts to Saskatchewan's public library system are really false economy. It's going to cost our communities so much more in the long term than the government is saving on these cuts.
Approximately 100 individuals are employed in the Southwest through the Chinook Regional Library System.
So on April 24th, the provincial government restored full library funding for the year. So we were very grateful to Premier Wall and his government for admitting that they made a mistake, which they went on the record saying the cuts to library funding were a mistake. So yeah, we thanked him, and I called him, and I've thanked him several times in person. We had another rally planned at the point where they announced that the funding would be reinstated. And instead of having a rally, we turned it into a party. We moved it from Premier Wall's office down the street to Market Square and had a party for Saskatchewan's libraries. And you can see our good friend Anthea Lauren came and read stories to the children with Shimmer the literacy donkey in celebration of saving our Saskatchewan public libraries. And Anthea has recently passed away, and we miss her. She was a treasure for the library and a treasure for our whole community. So I'm glad she got to see that. And now our library has celebrated its 100th anniversary. We had a big party last Saturday.
2018 is a big year for the Swift Current Library, and an outdoor celebration was recently hosted, marking its 100th anniversary. The family-oriented event offered activities for all ages, including the printing of a commemorative library button. And despite the digital world we live in, the local library continues to play a crucial role in the community, with 103,000 in-person visits recorded in the past year, with numerous programs offered for all ages.
So many people think that just because you can access information on the internet that libraries are not relevant anymore, the funding crisis was a really good opportunity for the entire community to show that they are using libraries, and it really gave us a chance to highlight some of the innovative programming that we're doing. At the Swift Current branch, we do a ton of programming around technology, and that's really been paying off. We have a lot of seniors who are learning to use iPads and computers to communicate with their friends and family. People are learning how to use technology to fill out all their government forms, like it's a necessity right now. And the library makes learning about technology really accessible.
A facility which City Councillor and Library Board member Ron Tolles believes plays an important part in our community, while bringing families and seniors together for lifelong learning.
You know, and that's another good reason why we have to keep a library in the core of the city. You know, because there's so many people in this surrounding area that can get here. Some can walk, they can carry the bus, but it's central, and that's really important.
The Swift Current Library is open 7 days a week and is located within the R.C. Dahl Center on Herbert Street East.
In 2018, 100 years later, the Swift Current Library is a really busy and vibrant place. Last year we had over 103,000 in-person visits. People used the public computers about 10,000 times, and our library is regularly jam-packed full of seniors playing bridge, whist, cribbage, and Scrabble, children building literacy skills at baby and toddler times and story times, and people of all ages come to learn technology skills in a relaxed and friendly environment. And the 3D printer that we got last year was such a big hit. And we have a really wide range of people using our 3D printer, all the way from kids to farmers to engineers to 2 high school students who recently won a trip to the National Science Fair in Ottawa because they 3D printed their own prosthetic robotic hand that they programmed with Arduino. So we're very proud of them. And this is one of the ways that the Swift Current Library has progressed over the last 100 years. I'm sure it would be really hard for Reverend Speller and Mr. and Mrs. Treliving to imagine what the library has become, but I think they would be really, really thrilled to see that what they started has carried on and that the people love it so much. And I think the crisis of last year really made our library stronger. And it really demonstrated to many levels of government just how much the people of Swift Current care about their library.
Well, I didn't have internet when I first moved here, so the library was a handy place to use the internet, yes. And I didn't have a TV, so I used the DVDs. And yeah, I ordered books online that I was interested in reading, and they delivered them to the library and I picked them up. Yeah, no, it's a great place. Friendly staff, yeah, always helpful. I even took a few courses there too, so.
Like what?
I took a web making course, web page making course, yes.
Are you surprised by all the different services that are available there?
Yes, I was, because I have never really used a library since I was in high school. Well, library and university I went to library too. It's quite a while ago. Yeah.
Well, I have to be a little honest here because I did work under contract with the library for 12 years. I was their computer technician, and I went around. Came in just about the time that they were computerizing the library, so I was going around installing computers, repairing computers, installing new programs, and so on. All those sorts of things to do with the computers of the library. And it was great fun because I would travel to these small libraries, and it was so interesting to talk to the ladies who were running these small libraries because they had such a fund of knowledge. And that may be where I heard the story of the book boxes. And they were so interesting people to be talking to. And they were dedicated to their own community and to having the library there as a cultural source for their community.
I started working at the Art Gallery in 1986 and up till 1993. So, of course, the Art Gallery being the same building as the library, our staff kind of collaborated on different things and had to schedule things around each other's activities. So that was even before the library was expanded. So we shared the staff room, for example, the conference room, which is still active these days. We had to make sure that we knew what the other other side of the building was doing in order to use the conference room for public programming or our individual projects as even workspaces, for example. We didn't have a lot of workspace for preparation and so on. So it was really a matter of communication, how to make sure that everybody was on the same page.
The library has become a really integral part of the community in Swift Current. It's been pretty well used over the last 100 years, as you can see by the way we've kept outgrowing every space we've been in. I think the founders of the library would be really thrilled to see what they started and just how well loved it is and how popular it is, and that people are still using it to improve their lives and improve their literacy, now including technology literacy. They would be shocked at the actual things we do in the library, but at the same time, a lot of the things we do are very similar.